Dembash. I'm Sarah Glynn for Media News, and this is my weekly news review for Saturday, the 29th of June. Turkey's drums of war and European silence. President Erdogan's promise to eliminate the PKK, repeated last Tuesday at the police graduation ceremony, is hardly new, but that doesn't mean that anyone should get complacent. When Erdogan talks of the PKK, he includes the politicians and security forces in the autonomous administration of north and east Syria. This week's threat has been accompanied by reports of a mass build-up of Turkish forces in the Kurdistan region of Iraq, and also by tentative indications that Erdogan and Syria's President Assad might be moving a step closer to a future rapprochement that could see them combining to crush the autonomous administration. In recent years, Turkish military activity in the Kurdistan region of Iraq has never let up, but sometimes, as now, it intensifies. Under the guise of eliminating the PKK, Turkey is effectively occupying a large part of the region and has established a vast network of military bases and linking roads. They've not been able to achieve the control that they would like, and PKK guerrillas are still dug into the mountains from where they can ambush the invaders and inflict significant losses. But they have made life impossible for the local population, who are increasingly forced to flee their villages and livelihoods. In the first 6 months of this year, 8 villagers were killed in Turkish attacks. Hundreds of villages have already been emptied, and it is claimed that over 600 more are currently under threat. Hundreds of Turkish military vehicles are rolling into the region, and Turkish soldiers have been setting up checkpoints and patrolling village roads. This is all taking place in Iraqi territory, and with the active help of the Kurdistan Democratic Party, the KDP, and their Peshmerga forces. The Barzani family, which controls the KDP, has long hitched their wagon to the Turkish state. The weak Iraqi state that emerged from the debris of the US invasion has never been able to do more than make muted protests, and this spring memoranda was signed between Iraq and Turkey for greater cooperation on a range of issues. Iraqi border guards now add a further restriction to PKK movement. When Syria collapsed into civil war, Turkey backed the Islamist opposition militias that were attempting to overthrow Assad, but which were thwarted by Russian support for the Syrian government. The militias became mercenaries acting on behalf of Turkish interests. They aided Turkey's occupations and continue to attack north and east Syria and the autonomous administration's Syrian Democratic Forces, the SDF. In 2022, Turkey declared that Assad's departure was no longer their aim, and the militias are no longer fighting Syrian troops. However, Assad has made clear that he will not accept continued Turkish occupation in northern Syria. Russia has long been pushing for normalization between Syria and Turkey, and while Turkey has stated their desire to control the north of Syria, with Erdogan even holding up a map of his so-called safe zone at the United Nations General Assembly before their last invasion in 2019, they could be persuaded to convert this ambition into an agreement to work together with Syria to eliminate any shred of Kurdish autonomy. The two obstacles to this are potential opposition from the militias themselves and the question of Turkish withdrawal from Syria. With regard to the first, Turkish Foreign Minister Hakan Fidan implied on Monday that their mercenaries would come on board, stating on Turkish television, "We believe that a more stable Syria, integrated with its government and opposition, will be a more effective actor in the fight against PKK terrorism." When Turkey talks about the PKK in Syria, they mean the SDF and the region's main political party, the Democratic Union Party, or PYD, both of which have made clear that they have no intention of attacking their Turkish neighbours. However, Hayat Tahrir al-Sham, HTS, the al-Qaeda offshoot that, with Turkey's backing, has consolidated control over Idlib might be a different matter from the militias in Turkey's pay, and the chances of catalyzing a strengthened ISIS or new similar groups would also be high. The day after Fidan's TV appearance, Syria's presidential website affirmed Syria's openness to all initiatives, but it also made clear that any normalization of relations must be based on Syria's sovereignty and territorial integrity in its entirety. Assad wants to see the departure of US and other Western troops, the end of autonomous organization, even though North and East Syria stresses that they are not seeking separation from Syria as a whole, the defeat of HTS, and also the end of Turkish occupation. The new element in the mix is the involvement of the Iraqi Prime Minister Mohammed Shia al-Sudani in the role of mediator as part of Iraq's new engagement with Turkey. Negotiations will be taking place in the knowledge that the balance of forces could change following the US election. Donald Trump has shown that he has little interest in keeping US troops in Syria, and the Democrats too might consider their withdrawal when not constrained by electoral considerations. Sharo Maruf reports that a step towards normalization was taken on Thursday with the opening of a border gate between the government-held and Turkish-occupied areas. He reports that some militia fighters attacked it yesterday, but that these were subdued by others. He also foresees resistance from Iran, who face losing their dominant influence over Syria, and he reminds us of the impossibility of predicting what may happen next. In defiance of Turkish threats and US disapproval, the autonomous administration is now committed to holding their postponed elections in August. Turkey, which tries to portray these elections as a threat, may try to make this impossible. Here, on the gentle streets of Strasbourg, where the air is heavy with the scent of lime blossom, these political realities can seem to belong to some other world. Even the realization that in just over a week we could find ourselves under a far-right government feels absurdly incongruous. Our flag-decked Palestine marches give no sense of the nightmare that is Gaza. Impending war in Kurdistan is hard to imagine, and, like the latest developments in Turkey's erosion of democracy, not something that the great majority of people will even be aware of. But last week was one of the weeks when the Council of Europe hold their parliamentary assembly here, when MPs from the pro-Kurdish Dem Party, who are included in the Assembly's Turkish delegation, try and raise international awareness of what is happening in their country. Or one of the lawyers working on behalf of Abdullah Öcalan comes to the council and meets with its Committee for the Prevention of Torture, the CPT. And when Kurds and their supporters gather at the vigil for Öcalan outside to remind the council of their duty towards the imprisoned Kurdish leader. So I took the opportunity to talk to some of our visitors in order to better understand and explain the current state of Turkish politics. In a long interview with Berdan Öztürk, one of the Dem Party delegates to the Parliamentary Assembly, we discussed Erdogan's commitment to war and possibilities for peace. When I asked him if he thought Erdogan had turned his back on a peaceful resolution of the Kurdish question and chosen to pursue an option of all-out destruction in the same way that the Sri Lankan government had crushed the Tamil Tigers, he responded that Turkey had been following the Sri Lanka model for a long time. Quote, Erdogan doesn't want peace. He discovered that the peace process of 2013 to 15 strengthened the HDP, the Dem Party's predecessor. A dictator wants war always. They don't have any suggestion in regard of economy. There are many social problems, cultural problems, ecological problems. They don't have any solution for that. They have just one option, to be enemy of Kurdish people and try to sell it to Turkish people as well. Okay, we have enemy, we're in the war, you have to support us. Just be quiet, don't speak out. Most Turkish cities don't see it as a war, they see it as a defence. He invested everything into the war against Kurdish people, Kurdish status. He cannot go back anymore to a peace process. He has taken a lot of risk for one goal, to destroy resistance or movement of freedom for Kurdish people. He said, "We made a big mistake in Iraq in regard of Kurdish people and their status. We're not going to repeat it. We're not going to repeat it in Syria." End quote. For Öztürk, then, the main role of his Dem party is to explain to Turkish people, quote, "There is a war. We have a solution. You witnessed the way of the solution between 2013 and 2015. You can compare 2 years of this process with all of the history of Turkey. There is only one solution. The Kurdish question must be solved. The way to find a solution is a dialogue. There is no other way." End quote. And he notes, "We should tell the people of Turkey that if the economy is in bad situations, the reason for that is the war against Kurdish people." When I asked Öztürk about the position of the main opposition Republican People's Party, the CHP, which is rooted in Turkish nationalism, he pointed out that the party covers a wide range of perspectives, but that they too can see reality and the need for change. He commented that the March local elections, in which the CHP gained at the expense of the ruling Justice and Development Party, the AKP, and the Dem party proved its importance in Kurdish majority areas, provided the CHP with an opportunity to take a different road and not suffer a similar fate as the AKP. I discovered after our discussion that the Sri Lankan comparison was made by the CHP MP Sezgin Tanrıkulu as long ago as 2016. A human rights lawyer and now an elected representative for Diyarbakir, Tanrıkulu opposed the arrest of academics who signed a petition for peace and spoke out against Turkey's invasion of Syria in 2019. He represents the humanitarian wing of the CHP, but there are others who think very differently or who prefer to stay silent. The other Dem party delegate in Strasbourg was the party spokesperson Ayşegül Doyan. Although she was elected an MP a year ago, this was the first time that she had been able to come to Strasbourg. She explained to me that there was a case against her in Turkey under terrorism law, though all the evidence cited consisted of legitimate activities for her former role as a journalist. Her election should have given her parliamentary immunity, but this was only recently implemented. Even after that, when she tried to go to Paris for a meeting of the Council of Europe's Social Affairs Committee earlier this month, she found out at the airport that she was not allowed to leave the country. She is only able to travel now due to intervention by the Council of Europe. Meanwhile, 2 Dem party co-mayors who planned to accompany the delegation to Strasbourg so as to inform the Council about Turkey's attacks on local democracy have found themselves among 9 Dem party mayors who've been given a travel ban. My interview with Öztürk also looked at other examples of repression in Turkey. He observed that the replacement of the mayor of Hakkari with a government trustee has found little support outside the ruling AKP, but that protests have elicited no public statement from the Council of Europe, the European institution established to protect human rights, democracy and the rule of law. He further observed that Huda Kaya, one of 5 former HDP MPs whose trial in the second Kobani case began on Tuesday, prompted a special government anger for choosing to represent the HDP, the forerunner of the Dem party, despite being a religious Turk. That the HDP closure case still hangs over many politicians, including himself, who could find themselves banned from party politics for 5 years, and that last week's disastrous fire, which has been shown to have been the result of badly maintained electrical infrastructure, demonstrated the government's lack of care for anything in Kurdistan. At the centre of Turkey's oppression of the Kurds is Turkey's abuse of Kurdish leader Abdullah Öcalan, who has been isolated in Imrali Island prison for 25 years. Cengiz Yürekli, one of Öcalan's lawyers, came to the council to demand that they comply with their obligations and make Turkey respect Öcalan's basic human rights. Turkey, a council member who must comply with the European Charter of Human Rights, keeps Öcalan in conditions that are regarded as torture and isolates him illegally from his lawyers and his family. For 39 months he has had no contact at all with the outside world, bar one visit from the Council's Committee for the Prevention of Torture, the CPT, in September 2022, about which the CPT will say nothing. The CPT has the right to visit all prisoners in member states, and directly met with officials from the organisation yesterday. He told me beforehand that he was going to demand that they send another delegation to Imrali Island prison and that they make an open and transparent statement following their visit. He stressed that this could be done without requiring Turkey's permission, which is needed for publication of their full report, and that this is an emergency in which every minute counts. He emphasised that what happens in the Middle East affects Europe too, that Öcalan fights for the identity of a people whose history is erased, whose language is banned, and who have been subjected to massacres, and that Öcalan is also the author of a philosophy that represents the values of humanity, showing a way to live in harmony with nature and in equality with other people. Öcalan's importance for humanity and the failure of the Council of Europe to fulfil their role and protect his rights were highlighted by international speakers at the press briefing held at the permanent vigil for Öcalan opposite the Council building on the occasion of the vigil's 12th anniversary. The speeches were opened by Irish MP Paul Gavin, who highlighted the hollowness of the Council's slogan, "United around our values," and the shame and disgrace of the Council's ignoring of the Kurdish question and of the very just demand that Öcalan must be free. He observed that the freedom of Julian Assange, announced that morning, shows the power of campaigning, and that peace requires dialogue, for which Öcalan is the key.